Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Ironbark Podcast. I am your host Epion, and today this is going to be a big deal episode. I think it's going to be very interesting for the people listening to this to really get my takes on it. I want to preface this by saying, if you're a right wing leaning person, you're probably going to hate this podcast episode, and if you're a left leaning uh, person, you're probably going to hate this episode. This topic gets into politics a little bit. It's kind of political. It's been politicized, but it is what it is, and I'm going to discuss my perspective on it and my stance on it. I think it leaves both sides of the political spectrum kind of feeling upset that I don't agree with certain things, but I agree with other things. And yeah, it's interesting. I think I feel like I have an interesting take. Some people, I find most people will hate it because it's sort of like that fence sitter, like in the middle. Like no one likes someone that sits in the middle. No one likes a neutral person. People like people that reinforce their own beliefs and feel strongly and want to rally the troops with them. That's not who I am. It's not who I've ever been. I've always been kind of like a moderate, uh, fair but firm type of person. And I'm just going to get into it. So, this is about climate change. Yeah, climate change. You knew this one was coming. I've had plenty of debates with people. I've talked to lots of friends about it. Everybody feels differently. You'd be surprised. There's conservative people that actually believe deeply in climate change as well, like right wing people. There's left wing people that don't. It's sort of a topic that's escaping. I feel like being political. It's sort of just like now. It's sort of just how people feel about certain things. And I feel like that's a lot of certain political topics. Like people vote one way, but they may feel differently about certain things. They're not like these keystone breaking uh, topics. So I just want to preface. Oh, I've already prefaced, but I just want to say is so the question I get asked: do you believe in climate change? Do you think climate change is real? This is a bit of a loaded question. And the reason it's a bit of a loaded question is because what are you actually asking me when you ask me that question? Do I believe the climate changes? Simple, straightforward like that? Yes. And I don't think many people would disagree and say the climate is always the same. You look at the geological record, you can clearly see okay, it used to be Pangea was one continent. Obviously, certain places were different. They had different temperatures. It was very tropical and humid back in the dinosaur time. Oxygen levels were way higher at certain points as well. The climate has been vastly different in Earth's history. So the Earth has never had a static climate. It's this ever changing, ever growing, ever evolving rock floating through space. And the life forms on it adapt and evolve accordingly to those changes. Some of them don't, and they go extinct, and others do. Um, so I just want to say, climate change, yes, I believe it's real. But what I don't really believe in or support is the alarmism behind it and the politics behind it. So this is where the left agree with me or will be pleased to hear. It's like, oh, he believes in climate change. And well, the left will be upset when I don't believe in alarmism behind it. It's like, oh, he doesn't feel that strongly about it. He's right wing, but then a right winger will be listening to this and be like, he might just straight up say climate change isn't real, and then he'll say I'm a left person. So I kind of get left without an island in a way on these types of topics. But a lot of people say like, oh, look at the science behind it. Look at the science. Like, are you a science denier? This and that. No, and that's why I'm going to bring some of my science to the table. And if anyone feels strongly about this, you can go ahead and leave comments. You can DM me on X, and we'll discuss it. You can potentially even come on this podcast. You can, and I'm not married to these ideas, by the way. You can change my mind. You can inform me. You can show me like the information, the data, and I'll be like, oh, that's convincing. You've convinced me. Like if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. That's just the way I am. I don't get married to my ideas and my thoughts, and I actually like becoming better informed. So when you can come to me and be like, no, dude, you're wrong, and here's why, and not get like emotional about it or all fired up and like I'll respect the heck out of you as a person, and if you have an opinion that's different than mine. So here's some things I just want to talk about. I was going to throw them out there, and you can figure it out. You can Google it, then confirm it, and get the same answers that I do. And they're very it's very straightforward. It's very straightforward stuff. It's not complicated. So we talk about CO2 levels in the atmosphere. What are they currently? The current CO2 levels are 420 parts per million. Sounds like quite a bit, but now, what has Earth CO2 levels been like in the past? They have been as high as 4,000 parts per million, and life still persisted on the planet Earth during that time period, and that was in the Precambrian era. So, there's quite a large gap between 420 parts per million and 4,000 parts per million. So, on the other side of that, how little CO2 do we need before we can't sustain life? And the answer to that is 150 parts per million. So if you look at it as a scale, 150 parts per million being all life dies, and somewhere beyond 4,000 parts per million, all life dies. On that scale of things, we're actually closer to not having any CO2 or having too little CO2 and dying from that into like an ice age instead of like an overheat. It's an idea. It's like food for thought. And I can see people listening to this right now and being like, oh, well, it's easier to have a runaway greenhouse effect and gain numbers than it is to lose numbers and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, maybe, but this is what the numbers are now. This is how much space we have between, lifeless planet and not lifeless planet. We have a bit of wiggle room. That's why I say I believe in climate change, but I'm not necessarily on board with the alarmism behind it. Saying that, I still believe pollution is bad for the environment, and we should work towards a sustainable, renewable energy resource where we don't need to rely on fossil fuels because pollution is just bad, right? So I'm meeting people, I feel like, halfway. Now, I don't believe in the alarmism behind it, because if you were to just suddenly change the entire job market and the economy, and you were to say no gas operated vehicles at all whatsoever, everything is done, there's a cap, this and that, the ramifications that would have on society and civilization would be disastrous. They'd be terrible. You think about everybody in the oil and gas industry, everybody in the automotive, and all these other like branches that are impacted, like transport, all this stuff. All these people are now suddenly without a job, without an income. What happens? Maybe they resort to substance abuse. They can't put food on the table. People start stealing things. There's a massive economic collapse, basically. The amount of suffering humanity would receive from just cutting that off cold turkey, all of a sudden just putting a cap on it, we're not doing it anymore, instead of like a slow progressive change, the juice wouldn't be worth the squeeze. Like, you'd be having like more people, more pain in humanity than you would otherwise. So that's why I'm kind of like, it's not even economically realistic or like possible. So I always find the people that are like, we have to do it now. They seem to be a bit extreme. And when you start looking at the greater picture of things, most of these types of things only really get pushed in Western politics and Western society. So I looked at, okay, how much CO2 emissions does Western civilization have? Or how much are they responsible for? And the answer to that is 2%. So out of all the CO2 emissions in the world produced globally, Western society is responsible for 2% of them. So if it was to stop everything immediately, the only dent we would put in global emissions would be 2%. So it's negligible. So it means it basically stays the same globally. It has to be a global effort. I think everyone's making strides to kind of better the environment because they know this is the only planet we have. But to kind of chop ourselves off at the knees and just be like, no, we're not going to have any kind of cars anymore, any kind of transport, no airplanes, no nothing. It seems disastrous. It seems like it would spell disaster. So that's another thing. And then you see like all the people advocating for this, they go to like these climate change symposiums and they have like these big meetings and they travel from all around the world using these personal jets, which will emit more CO2 than your vehicle will in its entire lifetime, in your entire lifetime. That jet emits in like one trip. And it's kind of like, why can't they just do these kind of meetings over Skype? So they're advocating for like this like climate alarmism, environmental alarmism, but then they don't actually practice what they preach. Because if it was that alarmist, they wouldn't be doing it themselves. So it seems like a very much a rules for thee, but not for me type of thing. So that's how you know it's kind of like, it seems like it's just sort of like a tax game. Like it's sort of like, okay, how can we tax fuel more and energy more? Because it's the most used and reliable thing to tax. You can tax like junk food, right? But when push comes to shove and times get harder and people are spending less money, they may just say, okay, well, we're not going to buy junk food now because we don't need it. It's not good for us and we're struggling to afford things. So less people buying junk food, less tax dollars are being extracted from junk food. So what can you tax that is reliable, that people can't really use? Like you will use less if you don't have the money, right? You don't have the luxury. But you will need regularly on a daily basis fuel and energy to get places and to keep places cold or keep places warm, to keep the lights on, to keep the power running, the fridges running, the life support machines running. So it sort of seems like a tax on a tax for a lot of places because a lot of fuel is already taxed. So so it's like we're taxing it again. It doesn't seem fair, but it seems like people can get on board with it, or at least most people can get on board with it when it's sort of crafted to be like for the betterment of the environment. But how many of those tax dollars are going towards replanting forests? Or I don't really see the results of this tax. You know what I mean? So it's kind of, it seems like it's just about, money. And I feel like some people don't want to admit that because then it seems like they're being duped, and they don't want to admit that they've been duped because then they feel stupid. And maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. And, maybe I am. And I 100% believe that I could be. But I also believe I might not be. So that's why I'm doing this podcast. Another thing to consider and think about is that, I think we're still exiting the ice age. Some people believe the earth in its natural state, unimpacted by like a asteroid impact or a super volcano or something that causes it to go into an ice age, that it doesn't have ice caps in its natural form, and that these ice caps only exist because of this traumatic incident that happened to Earth a long time ago, and now these glaciers and stuff are slowly receding and everything's melting, and it just seems like we're just getting out of the ice age. We're still exiting the ice age to some degree, which could be true. And I don't know. People say like, well, it's accelerating. It's melting more and more and more. There's also a thing. I think there's like, I forget what it's called, but I think it's like Newton's law of like flow rate or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it is, but anyway, things that melt, like ice that melts, it's not a linear progression ever. It actually accelerates as it melts. So you can actually anticipate as something melts that it will melt faster and faster and faster and faster. Melt rate is not static. It's not linear. It's exponential to some degree, and it gets worse and worse and worse just naturally. Because I guess there's like friction produced from the melt water, and it just imagine like a river. Like imagine you have an ice cube, like a really large ice cube, and it's just sitting out at like room temperature. It will slowly start to melt. Now, if it's large enough where like a river starts flowing and that flow rate is dragging ice away and off of it and basically acting like friction and erosion off the ice itself, well, you can anticipate to some degree that it's going to help the melting process faster, right? It's just the way it is. Running water, it's just what it does. It melts. So that's another thing I don't know if is always considered into like this. It's like, oh, it's accelerating. It's accelerating. It's like, well, it's kind of supposed to. Like it's kind of, now this is where you could come back at me and say, well, are the melt rates consistent with that, or has that already been, incorporated into the calculations and it's still much higher than it should be? And perhaps that is the case. So I might be wrong there, but I just want to say, like, these things aren't often articulated. They aren't like explained well enough. They're kind of just stated as like buzzwords and like buzz facts. They're just kind of like, it's melting faster. It's because of CO2 emissions. And it's kind of like, well, explain it. Explain it. And then you never have like, I bet for a lot of people, this is the first time they're ever hearing these sort of points being made to counter climate change. It's usually just, oh, I don't believe in it. And they just, they don't really say like all these other points. They don't talk about like parts per million and the comparison between life and death on the planet Earth on one way or the other with too less or too much. Another thing is that since we've had satellite imagery of the Earth and we've been able to view it, the Earth has only gotten greener. So trees, they actually consume CO2 and they'll produce oxygen, which is what we breathe in. CO2 to some degree is good for the earth. Like it's good for trees. It's what they, and then you never really hear about like these like climate protests and stuff talking about planting trees. I never see any of these people, like all these like notable figures ever talking about like, oh, we're planting this many more trees. Like we're doing this, we're planting, we're saving the bees, we're cleaning the seas. Like I never see any of these positive initiatives. It's always like these negative ones where it's like tax dollars and protests is the only way to save the environment and climate change. It's like, well, no, you could plant more, native wildflower plants that help the bees. You could even, if you have a large property, maybe have like a beehive set up and let them do their thing naturally and just kind of like have them there and sort of just, caretake periodically for them. You could plant a lot more trees. You could just plant trees, just start planting them, plant them like crazy, plant them everywhere. Every tree that's cut down, plant like 3 more. You don't really see like these efforts being made. There was like private companies that are doing this or startups where they're cleaning the seas. They're taking the garbage and the plastics out of the oceans and the rivers. You never see like people don't really do things for Earth Day anymore. They're like, I see lots of people doing stuff. I see lots of people, but I never see like getting notoriety or like attention for it. And it's kind of a weird thing, but like there's people that will clean entire like miles and miles and miles and miles along the side of a highway that's like out in the remote nowhere, like mountain area. And they're just picking up all the trash and, they're accumulating how many stretches of miles are they cleaning up and how many like tons of garbage are they picking up or pounds maybe. And that's significant. That has a positive impact on the environment. That helps keep our environment clean. And it's just interesting. It's really interesting to watch these kind of things. Like people will drive a gasoline vehicle or fly a plane to a climate protest, but then they haven't planted a single tree. And it's like, where do you get off? Like yelling at people about climate change, but all you're doing is contributing to it as well. And you're saying your reasons are, righteous. It's like, well, how many trees have you planted? Like, and I've talked to these people and I asked them all these questions. It's like trees, seas, and bees is like always what I go to. It's like, well, how many, like, what have you done? Like these people have never really done anything in the sphere of positivity. It's always in like this weird negative realm of like, I gave them the business. I let them know. It's like, this, like I held a sign. It's like, they're like, who knows what they're up, like spray painting or whatever it is. It's like spray paint, like that has negative impacts on the environment, bro. Like, what are you doing? Like why don't you like take all that energy and plant a tree? But planting trees is actually kind of hard. It's kind of hard. Like it's hard to work. Like you've got to dig a hole. You can get better at it. You can learn tricks and stuff like that. But it's actually like work. So I feel like it's like almost like a work ethic thing. It's like I want to save the environment, but I don't want to work for it. It's kind of like, well, I don't know, how passionate are you really about it? And it just seems like they're kind of, I don't know, misguided to say it, to put it the nicest way possible, slightly misguided. So I try to like talk to people and be like, how many, like, why don't you plant a tree? Like, and then they say some crazy stuff. They say some wild stuff. Trees aren't helping the environment. Trees aren't good for, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, it makes no sense to me. But I've even seen like, guys like Bill Gates and stuff talk about that when they ask about planting trees and he like laughs it off. Like no, like it's not going to do anything. It's not going to help the environment. It's not going to help. It's like, dude, you make computers. Like you don't know anything really about. You didn't go to school for climate change, this and that. And I think it all comes down, and to the end of the day, it's like, well, I can't make money off planting trees, so nobody can, and so we don't want to talk about that as a solution or as a way to help it or to curb CO2. So that's basically it for me in a nutshell. That's basically it for me in a nutshell. I think that gets everything out there. So to recap, do I believe in climate change? Yes, I believe the climate is changing. Uh, do I believe we can ever achieve a point in our Earth's history where the climate just stays constant and the same forever? No, that's not going to happen. Things are going to change. They're going to change rapidly and suddenly in some cases, especially if there's like a super volcano or something like that up outside of our control or a meteorite strike. But we have to adapt. That's what humans do. They're very successful at it. One of the most successful species. Humans, dandelions, ants, and coyotes, I think, are like probably the best. But yeah, so it's just, I, do I believe in the alarmism? No, I don't. But just because I don't believe in the alarmism doesn't mean I don't think we shouldn't be making efforts to stop pollution. Because at the end of the day, we all know, we can all say, polluting is bad. It's unhealthy. It's bad for the environment, right? Right. Okay. So we're being grown ups in the room right now. So let's make some efforts progressively so that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. No one's losing their jobs. No one's losing their, income, their livelihoods. No one's like developing, you know, all these horrible things. And we just move on and we find like a good sustainable energy source. Maybe multiple ones that work. Nuclear is an option. Maybe we find better ways for solar and wind and all that kind of stuff. But it's interesting. I like the idea of like a massive solar farm and somewhere that gets very little precipitation, so you don't have to worry about hail damage. That can just act as like a giant power plant for like large portions of the country. I think that's a cool idea. I heard Elon talk about that once. But yeah, that's it. Is climate change real? Yes. Is alarmism kind of just a political hot topic? I think so, yes. Does that mean I want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and just cut off the oil and gas industry at the knees and leave everyone in the dust to figure it out? No, I don't want to see that kind of human suffering. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. Um, do I want to see us progressively move towards sustainable energy sources so we can stop polluting? Yes. That's my take on climate change. Take it or leave it. Um, I think it is being a fair but reasonable stance. I don't think it's extreme one way or the other. Um, and I think some people will disagree to me with me because I think perhaps they're just too caught up in the political rat race. And I think we need to start being more reasonable with each other. We need to be more open-minded towards each other, more understanding. And I think you can do that effectively when you listen to what the other side is saying instead of just throwing up walls and saying, I think they're lying. I think they're full of crap. No, 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 no. Anyways, folks, it's been a great episode. We're one away from 50. Climate change is a doozy. It's a doozy. So thanks for listening. Follow me on X. The name's Epion. I think the handle's at Nature's Epion. I have Instagram as well. YouTube, I've kind of fallen off that whole thing. I think my idea, I've talked about it in previous episodes, where I want to basically do an episode a day or a video a day on YouTube, and I'm just kind of saving them all up, and eventually I'll just take them all from X and put them on YouTube one a day and see if I can, best the algorithm somehow. Anyway, folks, thanks for tuning in. See you later.